I never thought I'd tell this story to anyone. Hell, I can barely believe it myself. But after what happened to me last October in the forests of northern Michigan, I can't keep it to myself any longer. Maybe someone out there saw what I saw. Maybe they'll understand. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I witnessed out there in the wild. I'm a retired Navy veteran. I served 2 tours in Vietnam. I've seen more than enough death and destruction. I lost good men friends. When I came home, it was my wife who helped me heal from those wounds in the dark. We raised 2 kids. We raised them right. I watched them grow, start their own lives, and move away. Then cancer took my wife 3 years ago. Just like that, the woman who'd been my rock for 42 years was gone. My kids live in California now. They've got families of their own. If I'm lucky, I see them twice a year, Christmas, maybe once more. Life gets lonely, but I've learned to live with it. The woods became my refuge. I've always loved camping and fishing, ever since I was a boy. After my wife passed, I started taking longer trips, sometimes a week, sometimes 2. Just me, my gear, and the silence of the forest. It cleared my head, kept the memories from eating me alive. Last October, I decided to head out one more time before the holiday season. Halloween was coming, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas, the loneliest stretch of the year for a man like me. I figured I'd go up into the Upper Peninsula, get into the backcountry, maybe paddle the rivers out there. I brought my old aluminum canoe, my camping gear, and my rifle. Always bring the rifle. You never know what kind of animals you'll run into. The first week was perfect. Cool but not freezing, skies clear as glass. I found a good spot, maybe 15 miles from the nearest road, and set up camp in a small clearing. There was a river about half a mile away, winding through the trees, good for drinking water, good for fishing. I'd been in that area before, so I knew my way around. The first few days passed like they always did. Up at dawn, coffee over the fire, long hikes, fishing, evenings by the flames, reading some old paperback or just staring up at the stars, peaceful. Exactly what I needed. But on the 4th day, things started to change. I was running low on water, so I grabbed my canteen and headed down to the river. Mid-afternoon, sunlight filtering through the trees. I knew the trail by heart. 10 minutes on a game path, then down the slope toward the sound of running water. I was maybe 50 yards from the bank when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear, a massive dark shape standing near the water's edge. But then it stood up straight and I realized it was on 2 legs, not like a bear rearing up. This thing just stood there upright like a man. But it wasn't a man. It was huge, 7, maybe 8 feet tall, covered head to toe in dark brown hair. Its shoulders were broader than any man's I'd ever seen, arms hanging long at its sides. It didn't move. It just stood there by the water. Then it saw me. Our eyes locked across the distance, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Vietnam. Raw, primal fear. This thing looked at me like it was deciding, was I a threat or was I prey? For a couple of seconds, we just stared at each other, and then it moved. I've never seen anything that big move so fast. 1 second it was at the river, the next it was crashing through the brush, gone in a heartbeat. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, and then silence. Absolute silence. I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My hands were shaking as I filled my canteen. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a pair of eyes watching me from the tree line. Back at camp, I tried to reason it out. Maybe it was a bear. Maybe the light played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. That thing walked like a man, but it wasn't human. That night, sleep wouldn't come easy. Every little sound had me clutching the rifle. The wind in the trees sounded like footsteps. The hoot of an owl echoed like a warning among predators. I drifted in and out of sleep, waking every hour or so to scan the edges of camp. Around 3 in the morning, I woke into absolute silence. If you've ever spent time in the woods, you know there's always sound buzzing insects, the scurry of small animals, the whisper of wind through the trees. But at that moment, there was nothing. A dead silence, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. That's when I knew I was being watched. I didn't move, didn't even open my eyes. I just lay there in the sleeping bag, listening. My rifle was propped against a tree within reach. Slowly, carefully, I slid my hand toward it. The sense of being watched was so strong it raised the hair on my arms. It felt like being back in enemy territory, knowing there was a sniper out there you couldn't see. That cold knot of fear twisted deep inside me. I stayed like that for what felt like hours. Finally, the familiar sounds of the forest returned. Insects, small animals moving. Whatever had been watching me was gone. Dawn came too fast. That morning, I should have packed up and left. I should have trusted my gut. But you know what they say, curiosity kills the cat. I couldn't shake what I'd seen. Was it real? Could something that large really be out here? I decided to go back to the river. This time, I carried my rifle and approached from downstream, finding cover in a thick patch of brush where I could watch without being seen. I settled in and waited. Hours passed, nothing. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing. And then I heard them. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps moving through the forest. Not one, at least two, maybe three. They were coming downriver. I crouched lower into the brush, forcing myself to breathe slow and quiet. Through the leaves, I had a clear view of the spot where I'd first seen it the day before, and then they emerged, two of them, huge, upright, walking like men, but clearly not men. The first was dark brown, just like the one I'd seen. The second was lighter, almost reddish in the sunlight. They moved with purpose, as if they owned that stretch of river, and maybe they did. I watched them for nearly an hour. They fished better than anything I've ever witnessed, just reached into the water and pulled fish out with their bare hands. No nets, no tools. Their reflexes were lightning fast, far beyond what a human could manage. In minutes, they had enough fish to feed a family. The way they moved was unlike anything I'd ever seen. In the water, despite their massive frames, they were graceful, almost like dancers. The darker one would stand perfectly still in the current, then explode forward the instant a fish passed, never missing once. When they drank from the river, they cupped their hands the same way a man would. When they communicated, they used short calls and hand gestures, sounds that weren't random animal noise. There was rhythm, a pattern, something that felt like language. At one point, the lighter one pulled something from the water, a piece of metal, maybe part of an old fishing lure. It held it up, turning it over in its hands, studying it. Then it showed the darker one. They both examined it for a while, making soft, clicking sounds back and forth, and then the dark one took it and flung it far downriver, almost as if they didn't want any trace of humans left in their territory. What struck me most was how smart they seemed. These weren't just animals acting on instinct, they were thinking, planning, communicating. At one point, the darker one gestured downstream and made a sound toward the other. They seemed to be talking, trading back and forth calls, hand signals, even disagreeing. The lighter one shook its head several times before finally nodding. That's when it hit me. I was witnessing something that wasn't supposed to exist. These creatures had their own society, their own way of life. They were organized, maybe more organized than some human communities I've seen, and after they finished fishing, they did something that stunned me. They cleaned up, gathered bones and scales, even smoothed out the mud where they'd been standing. By the time they left, the riverbank looked almost untouched, as if they didn't want to leave a single trace behind. And then came the moment that froze me to the core. The darker one looked directly at the brush where I was hiding and let out a soft call to the other. Not aggressive, more like a warning. They knew I was there. Maybe they had known all along, but instead of confronting me or running, they simply gathered their catch and walked back into the forest as if I wasn't worth the trouble. I stayed hidden for another 2 hours after they were gone, too terrified to move. My legs cramped from crouching so long in the brush, but I didn't dare stand up. What if there were more of them? What if one had stayed behind to watch me? When I finally summoned the courage to crawl out, I crept down to the riverbank where they had been fishing. I had to see it for myself. I had to find proof that what I'd witnessed was real. The ground was still damp, and there were faint impressions of their tracks in the mud. The footprints were massive, 18, maybe 20 inches long, wider than any human foot, with what looked like claw marks at the toes. I measured one against my own boot. I wear a size 11, and next to that track, my foot looked like a child's. Whatever these things were, they were built for power. Built to survive in the wilderness better than any man could. There were other signs too, broken branches more than 8 feet off the ground, far too high for a man to reach without climbing. Fresh scratches scored into the bark, and a musky, wild odor hung in the air, like wet animal fur mixed with something I couldn't identify. I snapped pictures with my old digital camera, though I knew they wouldn't turn out sharp. The light was bad, and my hands were shaking too much to hold the camera steady. Still, I needed to document what I found. I was on my last shot when a sound froze me in place, heavy, deliberate footsteps in the forest behind me. Something or someone was coming back. I grabbed the camera and ran. I didn't look over my shoulder. didn't try to see what was following me. I just tore through the undergrowth toward camp as fast as these old legs could carry me. Behind me, I heard its steady, thunderous steps. Not running, just striding. Each one covering twice the ground I was in my blind panic. Whatever it wasn't in a hurry. It knew these woods better than I ever could. It knew I couldn't escape. When I got back to camp, I immediately checked my gear. The rifle was loaded and ready. I built the fire high so I'd have light if anything came calling after dark. I stacked extra wood within arm's reach. But that night, nothing happened. No visitors, no strange noises, nothing out of the ordinary. Just another night in the forest, except I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I forced myself to eat dinner, though I barely tasted it. Tried reading, but the words blurred on the page. Every tiny sound had me reaching for the rifle. The wind through the trees sounded like breathing. A creaking branch sounded like footsteps. Around midnight, I heard them calling to one another. Low, haunting cries rolling through the woods, echoing from different directions. One call, then an answer farther off, then another from somewhere else. They were spread out, maybe miles apart, but clearly communicating. The calls went on for nearly an hour. Sometimes the sound was so close, the walls of my tent vibrated. Other times it was distant, almost lost in the wind, but always there, always reminding me I was surrounded. Sleep never came that night. Dawn crept in slowly, along with a decision. I should pack up and leave, head home, forget everything. But something held me back. Maybe it was stubbornness. I'd planned a week-long trip and I wasn't ready to cut it short. Maybe it was curiosity. I'd seen something extraordinary, and a part of me wanted more. Or maybe it was something deeper. After years of loneliness, of feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, maybe I'd finally stumbled into something that made me feel alive again, even if it terrified me. So I stayed. One more day. The morning passed quietly. I cooked breakfast, tidied camp, tried to act like nothing had changed. But the rifle stayed within arm's reach, and I never strayed far enough that I couldn't see the fire pit. Around midday, I found their trail. It was maybe 100 yards from camp, a path cut straight through the underbrush that I'd somehow missed before. The bushes were trampled flat, branches snapped at shoulder height for something much taller than me. This wasn't deer, this wasn't bear, this was something else entirely. I followed it for maybe half a mile before my nerve gave out. The trail pushed deeper into the forest, away from the river, into territory I'd never explored. The trees grew thicker, the shadows darker. It felt like I was crossing into their domain, their home, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was me being reckless. Whatever these creatures were, they had tolerated my presence so far. But if I kept following their trail, if I trespassed deeper into their territory, that tolerance probably wouldn't last. I turned back toward camp, but I couldn't shake the thought of what might lie at the end of that path. Where did they live? How many of them were out there? Did they have families, children, maybe even a community hidden deep in the forest? The questions haunted me all afternoon. I stayed concealed until sunset. They had left hours earlier, disappearing into the woods the same way they came. As night fell, I knew I had to head back to camp. That's when I made my second mistake. I should have waited for daylight. I should have stayed put. But I worried about leaving my gear unattended too long, and I thought I knew the forest well enough to navigate in the dark. I was wrong. I'd gone maybe a quarter of the way when I heard the first branch snap off to my right, about 50 yards out. Could have been a deer, could have been anything, but my gut told me otherwise. I froze, listening. The forest was silent again. That same suffocating silence I'd learned to recognize as a warning. No insects, no small animals, no wind through the trees. Just dead stillness, as though everything out there was holding its breath. I picked up my pace. My flashlight beam cut across the trees, casting shifting shadows that looked like figures ducking out of sight. Every fallen log looked like something crouching. Every low branch looked like an arm reaching out. Then I heard it again, another crack, this time from the left. Whatever was out there had moved. It was flanking me. My military training kicked in. Never walk a straight line when you're being hunted. I changed course, angling north, hoping to throw it off. It didn't work. A few minutes later, I heard movement ahead. Something big crashing through the brush, then stopping when I stopped. I was being herded, pushed off my route back to camp. My heart hammered so hard I was sure they could hear it. Sweat soaked my grip on the rifle. This was different from the river encounter. This wasn't just a sighting. This felt like a hunt. I tried to get my bearings, but panic made it impossible. Most of the stars were hidden by the canopy, and I'd lost all sense of direction. The river should have been somewhere south, camp to the north, but surrounded by endless trees that all looked the same. I couldn't be sure anymore. That's when I saw the first pair of eyes. Two glowing points reflecting in my beam, about chest height, maybe 30 yards away. I swung the light toward them, but whatever it was ducked behind a tree before I could get a clear look. Then another set of eyes flashed on my left, then another on my right. They had me surrounded. I backed up against a massive oak, trying to keep them all in view. But there were too many, spread too wide. I couldn't watch them all at once. "I know you're out there," I shouted, my voice shaking. "I don't want to hurt anyone. Just let me get back to camp." The words sounded ridiculous, like they could understand English, like they cared about my intentions. But then something strange happened. The eyes stopped moving. The forest went utterly still, as if they were listening, trying to understand what I had just said. Then one of them stepped into the beam of my flashlight. It was the lighter-colored creature from the river. Same massive build, same unnerving intelligence in its eyes. But up close, under the harsh light, the details chilled my blood. Its face was more human than ape, but twisted in ways I couldn't make sense of. The proportions were wrong. Eyes too deep set, jaw too broad, forehead sloping back at an unnatural angle. When it opened its mouth, I saw teeth that were nothing like a man's. Too sharp, too many. It made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a word, something in between. Then it tilted its head and made the sound again, as though it were asking a question. That's when I realized it was trying to communicate. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I don't know what you want." The creature stepped closer, close enough for me to smell it. That same musky odor from the river, only stronger, close enough to see its chest rising and falling with each breath. It raised one enormous hand and pointed behind me, toward the place I had come from. Then it made that questioning sound again. It was asking why I'd followed their trail, why I'd watched them at the river. "I'm sorry," I said, not knowing if it could understand, hoping that my tone would say what words could not. "I was only curious. I never meant any harm." It stared at me for a long moment, then made another sound longer, more complex. Almost immediately, I heard replies from the darkness all around. The other eyes shifted, but not toward me. They pulled back, retreating into the woods. The one before me gave a final sound, deeper, more urgent, like a warning. Then it too faded into the shadows, leaving me alone with my flashlight and a heart pounding out of my chest. Only I wasn't truly alone. I could still feel them out there, watching, guiding me toward the path they wanted me to take. I started walking again, hoping it was the way back to camp. Behind me, soft footfalls followed, not threatening, just present, like an escort ensuring I was leaving their territory. It took me an hour to stumble back through the dark woods, every step haunted by that steady presence at my back. When I finally saw the glow of my campfire through the trees, relief nearly brought me to tears. I turned once more before stepping into camp. In the flicker of the flames, I could make out several tall shapes standing just beyond the tree line, watching, making sure I stayed put. I built the fire as high as I could and sat against a tree with the rifle across my lap. They stayed there almost all night, silent sentinels in the dark. Their eyes caught the firelight, unblinking, unmoving. Around 3 a.m, they finally melted away. I should have broken camp right then, thrown everything in the truck, and driven straight home, but I was too drained, too exhausted to think clearly. I convinced myself I'd be safe until morning. I told myself they'd delivered their warning and would leave me alone. Once again, I was wrong. On the way back to camp, that familiar, unnatural silence swallowed the forest. Every bird, every insect, every small animal fell quiet all at once. The hair on the back of my neck bristled. I froze, listening. Nothing. Then I heard it, the snap of a branch somewhere to my left, not the crack of a deer or a rabbit. Something big had stepped on it. I raised the rifle, slipped the safety off. The familiar weight in my hands steadied me a little. Back in Vietnam, this rifle had saved my life more times than I could count. Maybe it would do the same here. But this wasn't Vietnam. This was something entirely different. I moved again, slower now, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every few steps I stopped, listening. Twice more I heard branches snap, each time from a different direction. Whatever was out there wasn't just following me. It was circling. My flashlight only reached about 30 feet, casting a small circle in the vast dark. Beyond that circle, anything could be hiding. Anything could be watching me stumble through their territory like a lost child. I tried to recall my Navy training, how to move silently in hostile ground, how to use cover, how to spot an ambush before stepping into it. But that training was for fighting men, not whatever these things were. Another sound, this time straight ahead. Something was moving carefully through the brush. I raised the rifle, swept the beam back and forth, straining for movement. Nothing. Just darkness. But I knew it was there. I could feel it sizing me up, judging me, deciding what to do with the intruder in its land. I was only a few hundred yards from camp when I saw it. A towering figure standing between two trees, dead still, as if it had been waiting for me. I raised the rifle and looked through the scope. Even in the dim light, I could see details. I wished I hadn't. It was the same creature I'd seen by the river, the dark brown one. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its face was almost human, but not quite. Broad features, deep-set eyes catching the faintest glimmer of light. When it saw me raise the rifle, it tilted its head, curious about the thing in my hands. Then it let out a growl unlike anything I'd ever heard. Deep, resonant, rumbling from somewhere in its chest. The sound made my teeth ache and my hands shake. This was no bluff. This was a warning. I didn't belong here. It stepped toward me. Each step was steady, deliberate, confident. This creature wasn't afraid of me or my rifle. Maybe it didn't even know what a rifle was. I kept the scope centered on its chest, finger on the trigger, but I didn't want to shoot. There was something in the way it moved, something in its eyes. Firing felt wrong. At about 60 feet, it stopped. We locked eyes across that narrow gap. I could see its chest rise and fall, see the fur ripple in the night breeze. Then it did something I didn't expect. It stepped behind a massive oak, fading out of sight. For a moment, I thought maybe it had decided to let me go. Maybe we'd both walk away from this. But I was wrong again. A rock the size of a bowling ball came hurtling from the dark. I barely dodged, hitting the ground hard as it whistled past my ear and smashed into the tree behind me with bone-cracking force. I rolled, brought up the rifle, and fired without thinking. The muzzle flash lit up the forest for a heartbeat. In that flash, I saw the creature stagger back, clutching its right arm. Thick, black blood oozed through its fingers. Then it let out a scream that will haunt me until the day I die. Pure pain, pure fury, ripping through the trees. And almost instantly, other screams answered from deeper in the forest. I had wounded one of them, and now the others knew. The injured one locked eyes with me again. Even bleeding. Even wounded. There was no fear in its gaze. Only rage. And something else. Maybe disappointment. As if I'd broken some unspoken pact. Then it turned and vanished into the dark. I didn't wait to see what came next. I ran, back to camp, shoving gear into my pack, grabbing what I could. The whole time, branches snapped and leaves rustled in the woods around me. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there, watching me scramble. I felt their eyes on me as I hauled the canoe toward the river. The road was 15 miles of thick forest, but the river would take me downstream to a small village about 8 miles away. With the canoe, I could make it in a few hours, even in the dark. So I dragged the old aluminum boat through the brush toward the water, rifle slung across my back, pack heavy on my shoulders. Every shadow looked like one of them. Every sound made me jump. When I reached the riverbank, I could hear them movement in the darkness all around. Heavy footsteps, branches snapping, low growls, deep calls. They circled me, but stayed just out of sight. I shoved the canoe into the water and jumped in, one hand on the paddle, the other gripping the rifle. That's when I saw them. As I pushed off, they began appearing along the shoreline. First one, then another, then more. I counted at least 6, maybe 8, different sizes, different shades of brown and gray. Maybe a family, maybe a whole tribe. Some held rocks, big ones they could easily have hurled at me. I sat frozen in that canoe, nowhere to run if they chose to attack. But they didn't. They just watched me drift downstream, their eyes glowing in the moonlight like a row of cats, following me with their gaze, but not attacking. Even after I had shot one of them, they let me go. I didn't understand it then, and I don't understand it now. Maybe they realized I wasn't truly a threat. Maybe they knew I'd only fired in self-defense after one of them threw a rock. Maybe they had some code against killing unless it was necessary. Or maybe they simply wanted me gone, and the easiest way to make that happen was to let me leave. I paddled hard downriver, glancing over my shoulder again and again. They followed along the bank for nearly a mile before melting back into the trees. The last one I saw stood on a fallen log that stretched across the water, just watching me vanish into the night. I reached the village a little after midnight, dragged the canoe up onto the dock, and sat there shaking for 10 minutes before I could walk to my truck. I drove straight home without stopping. Didn't sleep for 3 days. I've gone back to those forests since then. Not to that place, I'll never return there, but to other areas nearby. I've never seen another trace. No footprints, no broken branches, no eerie signs. Maybe they moved on. Maybe they were never really there, and my mind cracked after too many nights alone in the woods. I wouldn't be the first veteran to be betrayed by his own thoughts. But I know what I saw. I know what I lived through. Those creatures are real. They're intelligent. They have families, territory, their own form of communication. Maybe they've been in those forests for generations, even centuries, hiding from people like us. Sometimes I think about the one I wounded. I wonder if it survived, if its arm ever healed, if it told the others about the strange man who shot it and ran. I wonder if they remember me as a threat or just another frightened animal that wandered too far into their world. The strangest part is, I don't think they ever wanted to hurt me. Even after I pulled the trigger, they still let me go. They could have killed me, easily thrown rocks, rushed me, dragged me under the water when I had no defense, but they didn't. Maybe they saw my fear. Maybe they recognized something in me that reminded them of themselves. Just another living being trying to survive in a world that doesn't always make sense. I've thought about reporting what I saw. There are research groups that would be interested, but what good would it do? Even if they believed me, even if they sent a team out, those creatures would be long gone. They're too smart to linger after an encounter like that. Sometimes I wonder if I should have handled it differently. If I'd tried peace, tried to communicate, maybe they would have accepted me. Maybe I could have learned something about them, about how they live, about what they need to survive. But I was afraid, alone, and facing something I didn't understand. So I fell back on what Vietnam taught me. Identify the threat, neutralize it, shoot first, ask questions later. That training kept me alive in the war. But maybe it wasn't the right response here. Maybe they weren't a threat at all. Maybe they were just a family trying to live in peace. I still go camping, but now I stay closer to civilization, national parks, campgrounds with other people around. I tell myself it's because I'm getting older and don't want to take risks like I used to. But the truth is, I'm afraid of running into them again. Not because I think they'll hurt me. Honestly, I don't believe they would. What I fear is how I might react. Would I run again? Would I pull the trigger? Or would I finally have the courage to try a peaceful approach? I don't know, and I'm not sure I even want to find out. Sometimes people ask me if I believe in Bigfoot, SASQUATCH, whatever name you want to give them. I usually laugh and say, no, of course not. Just stories, just tall tales. People see what they want to see. Then I change the subject, because deep down, I know they're still out there. I saw them, I shot one, I looked into their eyes, and saw intelligence looking back at me. They're real, they're smart, and all they want is to be left alone. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe some things are meant to stay hidden, to live their lives without our interference. Maybe the fact that they've stayed secret this long means they're surviving far better than we think. I still keep my rifle clean and ready, not because I want to use it, but because it gives me a sense of security when I'm in the woods. It reminds me that I survived one encounter before, and maybe I could survive another if it ever happens. But more than anything, I hope it never does. I hope they've found a new place, far from hiking trails and campsites, far from curious people like me. I hope they're raising young ones, teaching them to hide, to avoid humans. And I hope the one I wounded somehow forgave me for being afraid. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that first moment on the riverbank. 2 different species, both just trying to live, both startled by an unexpected meeting. For a few brief seconds, there was no fear, no aggression, no violence, just recognition. A thought that mirrored my own thought. Maybe that's all we can hope for in this world. A single moment of understanding before fear and instinct take over. I shot a Bigfoot, and I regret it every day since. Not because I believe I did something wrong, I was defending myself from what I thought was a threat, but because I can't help but wonder what might have happened if I'd had the courage to lower the gun instead of raising it. I'll never know. But I'll never forget those eyes, that intelligence, that fleeting moment of connection between 2 very different beings sharing one small piece of wilderness. They're out there somewhere, and maybe it's better they remain hidden from people like me, people who react with fear instead of wonder, with violence instead of curiosity. Maybe someday someone else will have the chance to do better, to meet them with open hands instead of a loaded weapon, with questions instead of bullets. I hope so, because if I learned one thing from that encounter, it's this: we are not alone on this planet. There are other intelligent beings sharing this world with us. And maybe it's time we start acting like we deserve their respect instead of their fear. But that's a lesson I learned too late to do any good. All I can do now is tell my story and hope someone learns from my mistakes. If you ever find yourself out there in the deep woods and see something that shouldn't exist, something impossible, majestic, terrifying, think carefully before you raise your weapon. Try reaching out instead. You might be surprised by what you find. Applause. I'm writing this down because no one believes us anymore. The sheriff thinks we're crazy, neighbors avoid us, even our own kids don't pick up the phone. But I need to get it on paper before something worse happens, before it's too late. My name is Daryl, my wife is Jess, and I've been farming the same 240 acres in rural Oregon for 37 years. We raise cattle, grow hay, and keep to ourselves. We've seen plenty of wildlife out here over the decades: deer, elk, the occasional black bear, even a mountain lion once. But what's been happening on our land for the past 8 months, it isn't normal. It isn't natural, and it's getting worse. It started small. Last October, Jess noticed something strange with our chickens. We keep about 40 hens in a small coop behind the barn, and all summer they'd been laying steady. Then, all of a sudden, we were only getting maybe 6 eggs a day instead of the usual 25 or 30. The birds acted, spooked, huddled together in a corner during the day instead of scratching and roaming like normal. At first, I figured it was just foxes or raccoons sniffing around the feed. I reinforced the fence, added wire mesh on top, and put up motion sensor lights. For a couple weeks, things seemed better. The hens started laying again, and we thought we'd solved the problem. Then, one morning in early November, Jess went out to collect eggs and found the coop door ripped clean off its hinges. Not broken, ripped. The hinges were still bolted to the frame, but the whole wooden door lay splintered on the ground, 15 feet away. Every single chicken was gone, all 40 of them. I walked the area but couldn't make sense of it. No feathers scattered like a fox attack, no blood, no tracks I could recognize, even though the ground was torn up. Whatever had taken our chickens had peeled that door away like the lid on a can of beans. And then there was the smell. A sour, musky stench hung in the air for days afterward, sharp enough to make you gag. It reminded me of wet dog mixed with something I couldn't quite place. A week after the chickens disappeared, our neighbor's cattle started acting odd. Bob Martinez runs the place next door, and his herd is usually calm, steady. Suddenly, his cows were bunching up tight at the far end of his property, always the end farthest from our land, refusing to graze in the open pasture near us. Bob came by to ask if we'd noticed anything unusual. I told him about the chickens. He looked like he wanted to say something, then hesitated. Finally, he admitted his border collie had been barking every night for a week, always facing our direction. That afternoon, I decided to walk the fence line between our properties. The ground was still soft from recent rain. About halfway down the line, I found them prints, but nothing like any I'd ever seen. Huge, at least 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, pressed deep into the mud like whatever made them weighed far more than a man. The stride length was astonishing, 4 to 5 feet between steps. I followed the trail for about 100 yards until it vanished into the thick woods behind our property. I snapped photos on my phone, though they didn't come out great. When I showed Bob, his face went pale. He said he'd found the same kind of prints on his side the day before, but hadn't wanted to mention it. We agreed to keep an eye out and let each other know if anything else happened. It didn't take long. A few nights later, Jess shook me awake around 2 a.m. Something was outside. I listened. That's when I heard it, a low, resonant rumble from somewhere near the barn. Not quite a howl, not quite a growl, something in between. But deeper than anything I've ever heard from wildlife, the sound carried for a good 30 seconds before fading. We keep a shotgun in the bedroom closet. I grabbed it and went to the window. Our farm sits in a valley with hills on 3 sides, and the moonlight was bright enough to see across the pasture. Nothing moved. The cattle were bunched at the far end of the field, pressed tight together. Then the sound came again, this time from directly behind the barn. I thought about going outside to check, but something about that sound froze me. It was too deliberate, too intentional, like whatever made it was trying to communicate. Jess wanted to call the sheriff, but what could we say? That we heard a scary noise? I decided to wait for daylight. In the morning, I found more evidence. The big sliding door on the barn had deep scratches gouged into the wood claw marks, it looked like. They started more than 6 feet up and ran down to about shoulder height. Whatever made them had to be tall enough to reach the top of that door while standing flat on the ground. Inside, a few hay bales had been tossed around. We stacked them neatly in rows, but 3 from the back row now lay in the middle of the floor. Each bale weighs close to 50 pounds, but they looked like they'd been thrown there without effort. 2 weeks later, I saw it. One early morning, while checking the herd, I spotted something at the tree line, maybe 200 yards away. At first, I thought it was a person, someone just standing motionless among the pines. But when I looked closer, I realized it had to be enormous. The trees in that patch are old growth, some reaching 40 feet high, and the figure was level with the lower branches. I grabbed the binoculars from the truck and focused in. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't a man at all. The thing was covered head to toe in dark brown hair, with arms that hung well below its knees. Its shoulders were massive, its head seeming to sit directly on its torso, with almost no neck at all. It just stood there, staring back at me. We locked eyes for what felt like 5 minutes, though it was probably only 30 seconds. Then, without a sudden move, it simply stepped backward into the trees and disappeared. One moment it was there, the next, gone, like it had never existed. I drove the old Ford up to the tree line as fast as it would carry me, but by the time I got there was nothing to see. Only that musky, sour smell lingering faintly in the air, the same stench I'd caught near the chicken coop. When I told Jess what I'd seen, she didn't tell me I was imagining things. She just nodded and said she'd felt something watching her when she was hanging laundry. The clothesline sits between the house and the barn, with a clear view of the same tree line where I'd spotted it. December brought the first real snow, and with it, undeniable proof we weren't dealing with any ordinary animal. The creature, I was beginning to think of it as Bigfoot, though I'd never believed in such things before, left tracks everywhere. On the fresh snow, the prints were sharp and detailed. You could see the outline of toes, the arch of the foot, even something like wisps of hair pressed into the edges. Tracks circled the property, from the woods to the barn, around the house, past the chicken coop, and back into the trees again. Some mornings there were dozens, as if the creature had spent hours roaming our land in the dark. But the worst part wasn't the number of tracks. It was how close they came to the house. One morning, I found prints directly beneath our bedroom window, so close that whatever made them could have looked inside while we slept. The thought of that thing, standing there in the dark, staring through the glass at us, turned my stomach. I installed motion sensor lights all around the house and outbuildings. The first night they went up, the yard lit up 17 times between midnight and dawn. Each time I peered out the window, but saw nothing, just the glare of light across the snow, throwing strange shadows everywhere. By January, I knew we needed help. Things were getting worse, not better. The creature was growing bolder, and I feared it might try to force its way inside. I called the county sheriff's office and explained what had been happening. The deputy who answered was polite, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. He said they'd send someone out, but it took 3 days before anyone showed. The deputy who finally arrived was young, maybe mid-20s, with the look of someone humoring an old farmer. I showed him the tracks in the snow, the gouges on the barn door, the fence posts bent where something heavy had leaned against them. He snapped a few photos, scribbled in his notebook, but his disinterest was obvious. When I mentioned seeing the creature myself, he nodded and said he'd file the report. "We get a lot of bear calls this time of year," he added. "They can leave some pretty big prints, especially in soft snow." I tried to explain that no bear stands 8 feet tall and walks upright, but he was already heading back to his cruiser, probably thinking of how he'd tell the story at the station. We never heard from the sheriff's office again. By the end of January, the snow melted away. By February, things had escalated to an entirely new level. The creature wasn't just passing through our property anymore, it was living here. Every single day brought fresh evidence of its presence. Our garbage bins, stored in a wooden shed near the house, were no longer just knocked over, they were torn apart. Metal cans were twisted and crumpled into shapes no ordinary animal could have made, the kind of damage that required extraordinary strength. The thing seemed especially interested in leftover food scraps, but it scattered everything else across the yard, papers, bottles, anything that had once been inside those cans. I started locking the trash inside the barn, thinking that would solve the problem. The next morning, I found the sliding barn door smashed open. The lock was broken clean through, and the door itself bent along the track. Inside, the garbage was scattered everywhere again, but this time, feed sacks had been ripped apart and storage shelves knocked over. That musky, wild stench clung to everything it touched. The strongest concentration was in the barn itself, as if the creature had stayed inside for a while. In one of the empty stalls, I found what looked like a nest, hay, and old feed sacks piled together in a crude bed. Through February and into March, most of the encounters were mine. Jess had heard the noises, seen the tracks, but she hadn't come face to face with it. That changed one Tuesday morning. She went out around 7 a.m. to feed the animals. We'd bought 6 new hens to replace the ones we'd lost, and we kept them in a reinforced coop closer to the house. When Jess came back inside, her face was pale as paper and her whole body shaking. It took me 10 minutes to coax the story out of her. She'd been filling the water containers when she heard something behind her. When she turned, the creature was standing less than 20 feet away, just watching her. She described it as massive, close to 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair that looked almost black in the daylight. Its face was something between man and ape, with eyes that seemed to cut straight through her. They stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then it made a sound, not the howling we'd heard at night, but something closer to speech. The sounds didn't form words, but there was rhythm, cadence, inflection, like it was trying to talk. Finally, it turned and walked away, not rushing, not bounding, just striding off on 2 legs like a man, only twice the size. Jess hasn't gone outside alone since. March brought warmer weather, and with it, a change in the creature's behavior. It wasn't just prowling and rummaging anymore. Now it was actively destructive. Fence posts began to snap always along the back boundary near the woods. These weren't old, rotted posts either. They were pressure-treated 6x6 timbers I'd set myself just 5 years ago. Breaking one would take immense strength or the right tools. And I knew it wasn't vandals. We'd have heard a vehicle long before it reached our place on the gravel drive. The thing also took an interest in our equipment. One morning I found the riding mower flipped upside down in the middle of the yard. That machine weighs nearly 400 pounds, and there was no way it ended up like that on its own. The next week, our utility trailer turned up 100 yards from where I'd parked it, both tires shredded to ribbons. After that, I started locking all the machinery in the barn at night, but it only encouraged the creature to find new things to destroy. It tore down sections of our split-rail fence, scattered the firewood I'd spent days stacking, and even ripped the tin roof off our small equipment shed. Each incident left behind that same rancid smell, and usually a new set of tracks stamped deep into the ground. By then, I must have had 200 photos. But no matter how many I took, none of them ever seemed to capture the sheer size of those prints. April brought the most terrifying incident yet. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to find our German shepherd, Rex, cowering under the bed, whining. Rex is a brave dog. He's chased off bears without hesitation. But that night, he shook like a leaf and wouldn't step outside no matter how I coaxed him. I grabbed the handgun and went to the front window. In the moonlight, I saw a massive dark figure moving near our truck. The creature was inspecting it, running its hand along the sides as if trying to understand what it was. Then, it gripped the side mirror and twisted it completely around. Next, it placed both hands on the hood. I watched as the suspension compressed under its weight when it leaned forward to peer through the windshield. I stood frozen at the window. Part of me wanted to fire a warning shot, but another part was terrified of what might happen if I provoked it. That thing was less than 50 feet from the house, and if it chose to come after us, I doubted the doors or windows would hold. After what felt like an hour, though it was probably closer to 10 minutes, it lost interest in the truck and wandered toward the barn. I watched until it vanished into the dark, then spent the rest of the night in an armchair with the pistol on my lap, waiting for dawn. The next morning, I found handprints on the hood, clear in the dust, each twice the size of mine. The mirror had been twisted back, and fresh scratches marred the paint where it had touched the truck. By May, I was desperate enough to try the authorities again. This time I called the state police instead of the county sheriff, hoping they'd take us more seriously. I spoke to a sergeant who was polite, listened carefully, and promised to send someone out. The trooper who arrived was older, more professional than the deputy we'd seen before. He walked the property, examined the damage, and looked over the photos I'd taken of the prints. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd get real help. But the moment I mentioned Bigfoot, his whole demeanor changed. That same look we'd seen before, the one people give when they're humoring country folks they think have gone off the rails. "We'll increase patrols in the area," he said, but I knew he was just trying to leave politely. When his cruiser rolled out of sight, I knew we were on our own. June brought another change. The creature began appearing in daylight. One afternoon, Jess was hanging laundry when she noticed movement in the tree line. At first, she thought it was a deer, but then a towering figure stepped out into the pasture. It stood there for several minutes, making no attempt to hide. In the full light, Jess saw details we hadn't caught before. Dark brown hair streaked with gray around the shoulders and arms. Its face more human than ape, with a heavy brow and deep-set eyes that radiated intelligence. What unsettled her most was its expression. Not hostile, but curious. It tilted its head side to side as if trying to make sense of what she was doing with the wet clothes and rope. Jess finished as quickly as she could, never taking her eyes off it. She walked slowly back toward the house, praying it would slip back into the woods. But instead, it followed. Not aggressively, just steady, deliberate. It stopped about 50 yards from her, striding upright across the pasture like it owned the place. By the time she reached the house and called for me, it had advanced to the edge of the yard, closer to our home in daylight than ever before. I ran to the window with a handgun, but by then, it was gone. On the soft earth where it had stood, though, we found the clearest tracks yet. Each toe distinct, the ball and heel pressed deep into the ground. By July, the creature had turned openly hostile toward anything mechanical on our property. By July, it seemed to have developed a special hatred for engines and motors, destroying anything that made noise or moved. One morning we found our riding mower completely dismantled. Not just broken, taken apart, the engine was ripped to pieces, parts scattered across 50 yards of pasture. The seat was torn in half, the steering wheel twisted like a pretzel, and the mower's frame bent into scrap metal. That same week, our generator was destroyed. We kept it in a locked shed behind the house for emergencies, but the creature had torn the door off its hinges and reduced the machine to wreckage. Oil and coolant splattered everywhere, and the engine block was cracked in two. I bought heavy-duty deadbolts for every outbuilding, thinking at least I could slow it down. 2 days later, every lock was ripped apart, along with chunks of the door frames. It didn't pick locks or search for keys. It simply overpowered anything we put in its way. We have a small hunting cabin about a half-mile into the woods, one I built with my own hands 15 years ago. It had been a place for peace and reflection, and once, family gatherings when the kids were young. I hadn't set foot there since the creature appeared, but in early August, curiosity got the better of me. I loaded the shotgun and followed the old trail I'd cut years before. The closer I came to the cabin, the stronger the musk became. By the time the building came into view, the stench was overpowering, and the cabin itself destroyed. Not damaged, not vandalized, destroyed. The walls had been pushed inward, the roof collapsed, debris scattered everywhere. It looked like a tornado had touched down. But tornadoes don't leave 18-inch footprints stamped into the wreckage. Inside the ruins, I found signs it had been living there. A crude bed of pine boughs and torn fabric that looked like it had been ripped from old clothes. Scraps of food scattered about, animal bones, fruit peels, even a few aluminum cans I recognized from our trash. The most disturbing find was a collection of items clearly taken from us over the months: tools from the shed, clothes from the clothesline, even some kitchen utensils Jess thought she had misplaced. They were arranged around the makeshift shelter, almost like decorations, as though the creature had been trying to make the place feel familiar, even comfortable. I didn't stay long. The smell made me sick, and worse, I had the overwhelming sense I was trespassing in someone else's home. Even though it was mine, I felt like the intruder. By August, the creature's boldness reached a new level. It began approaching the house more frequently, sometimes in broad daylight. We saw it walk across the yard as if it owned the place, checking our vehicles, peering into windows, leaving massive tracks everywhere. One afternoon, while Jess was fixing lunch, it came right up to the kitchen window. She was at the sink, washing dishes, when she felt something behind her. When she turned, its face filled the window. Black eyes stared straight into her from just inches away. Jess screamed and dropped the plate in her hands. The creature didn't flinch. It didn't react at all. It simply kept staring with an intensity that was almost childlike curiosity. After 10 agonizing seconds, it stepped away, wandered toward the barn, and disappeared as if nothing had happened. I was in town buying supplies at the time. By the time I got home, Jess was nearly hysterical. She had locked every door and window and was sitting in the bedroom with my pistol across her lap. It took me an hour to calm her enough to tell me the whole story. That night, I nailed plywood over the kitchen window and started keeping the shotgun within arm's reach. We weren't just dealing with a nuisance anymore. We were living in fear. September marked the turning point. Its behavior shifted from curiosity to outright menace. It stopped just observing and scavenging. It began actively threatening us. One evening, while I was driving the last of the cattle in from pasture, the creature emerged from the tree line and started walking toward us. This time, it wasn't by chance. It was deliberate, like it wanted to make a point. The cattle saw it coming and panicked, stampeding toward the barn and nearly trampling me. I raised the pistol and fired a warning shot into the air. The creature stopped, but it didn't retreat. It stood there in my pasture, 100 yards away, and let out a roar that rattled my chest. I've never heard anything like it, part growl, part scream, all fury. Then it charged not at me, but at the fence. It grabbed the top rail and tore out an entire section, flinging the post aside like it was a twig. The whole time, it kept its eyes locked on me, like it was putting on a show. After ripping out nearly 20 feet of fence, it turned and walked back into the woods. The message couldn't have been clearer. It could destroy our property whenever it wanted, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. By October, exactly 1 year since the first chicken incident, our lives had become a nightmare. We were prisoners on our own land, too afraid to go outside after dark and constantly scanning for signs of the creature during the day. It seemed to have settled into a routine. Every few days, it would emerge from the woods at dawn or dusk. Sometimes it just walked across the yard before disappearing again. Other times it lingered, poking around vehicles, peering into windows, leaving massive tracks all around the property. We started sleeping in shifts, one of us always awake to keep watch. Our dog, Rex, was useless now. At sunset, he crawled under the bed and stayed there until daylight. Even the cattle had abandoned the back pasture, keeping close to the barn where they felt safer. I thought about selling the farm and moving, but who would buy a property with a Sasquatch problem? And even if someone did, what if it followed us? We felt trapped. 3 weeks ago, things reached a breaking point. I was in the barn doing evening chores when I heard Jess scream from inside the house. I dropped everything and sprinted toward the sound, pistol in hand. When I burst through the front door, I found Jess backing into a corner of the living room, pointing toward the sliding glass doors that led to the back deck. Pressed against the glass were 2 massive hands. The creature stood on the deck, trying to peer inside. I could see its outline through the glass shoulders so broad they barely fit in the frame, a head hunched low on its body, arms that seemed impossibly long. It moved along the door, pressing its face against different spots like it was searching for the best angle to look in. I raised the pistol and aimed at the glass. It must have seen the movement because it stepped back and looked directly at me. For a moment that felt endless, we stared at each other through the glass. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lifted one enormous fist and slammed it into the door. The whole house shook. The glass didn't break, but a spider web of cracks spread across the pane. It hit the door again. More cracks splintered out, crawling across the surface. I knew one more strike would shatter it completely, and then there'd be nothing between us and that thing. I fired into the air, praying the sound would scare it off. Instead, it roared back, a primal, ancient sound that seemed to echo from the dawn of time. It struck the door a 3rd time, and shards of glass rained onto our floor. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and walked away. Not fleeing, not defeated, just walking. As if it had made its point and was satisfied. That was 3 weeks ago. Things have only gotten worse since. Now it comes almost every night. We hear it outside, testing the doors and windows, climbing onto the roof, making noises so terrifying we lie awake until dawn. Last week, somehow, it got into the attic. We found footprints in the dust up there, along with that sickening musk that tells us it's been inside our home. It had moved our Christmas decorations and family photos, but didn't damage anything. Almost as if it was trying to understand us studying our belongings to learn who we were. 2 nights ago, we woke to find the front door wide open. Neither of us had unlocked it, and there was no sign of forced entry. Somehow, the creature had opened a dead-bolted door without breaking the lock or the frame. It had been inside our home while we slept. Nothing was stolen, nothing destroyed, but everything felt violated. Our house, the one place we had always felt safe, was no longer safe at all. The creature could come and go as it pleased, and we were powerless to stop it. Yesterday, I found something that finally pushed me to write all this down. In our mailbox, a 1/4 mile down the driveway, was a piece of bark with scratches carved into it. They weren't random. The markings looked almost like crude writing or symbols. I don't know what they mean, but the fact that it left them in our mailbox tells me one thing. The creature is trying to communicate with us. It's studying us, our habits, our property, our lives. And that intelligence, combined with its unbelievable strength and absolute fearlessness, makes it more dangerous than any wild animal could ever be. I'm 59 years old, and I've lived on this land most of my adult life. I've faced droughts, floods, market crashes, and every kind of agricultural hardship you can imagine. But I've never faced anything like this. Whatever this is, it isn't just an animal. It's something entirely different. The authorities won't help, the neighbors think we've lost our minds, even our own family won't answer the phone anymore. It's just us and the creature, and it's getting bolder. I'm writing this because people need to know what's happening here. If something happens to Jess and me, if we vanish like those hikers in Alaska or die right here in our own home, I want there to be a record. I want people to understand we weren't crazy, paranoid, or delusional. There is something living in the woods behind our home, something that shouldn't exist, but does. It has been watching us, learning about us, slowly taking over our lives. And I have a terrible feeling we haven't seen the worst yet. This morning, I found fresh tracks leading right up to our front door, but these weren't like the others. The depth and spacing were different, as if it had been carrying something heavy. On the welcome mat lay a dead rabbit, not torn apart like a predator would leave it, but placed carefully, almost like an offering. I don't know what message it's trying to send, but the fact that it's leaving gifts means its behavior is evolving. Yesterday, it was satisfied with destroying our property and frightening us. Today, it left an offering. I'm terrified to imagine what tomorrow will bring. As I write this, the sun is sinking behind the hills, and that familiar musk is drifting through the yard. Somewhere in the woods behind our home, something that shouldn't exist is waking up for another night of watching, waiting, and weaving itself deeper into our lives. If you're reading this and believe any part of it, please share our story. People need to know there are things out there science hasn't classified yet. Things intelligent, powerful, and utterly unafraid of humans. And if you live in the country, especially near dense forests or mountains, pay close attention to your animals. Listen for strange sounds. Watch for tracks that are too large and too deep to be normal. Because once these creatures take an interest in you, I don't think they ever really go away. The motion lights just came on in the backyard. Through the window, I can see a massive shadow moving near the barn. It's here again, and it's coming closer. I'll hide this notebook somewhere safe, somewhere it won't find it in case something happens to us. Maybe one day, someone will read these words and understand what we went through. Maybe one day, someone will believe us.